Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to go back to 2010 and break down the first leg of the Champions League semi-final between two of the best sides in Europe. Inter Milan against Barcelona, Jose Mourinho against Pep Guardiola, and we're going to analyze how Inter Milan comfortably defeated Barca here. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Inter in more of a 4-2-3-1, and Barcelona were practically playing the same shape, although you can say it was more of a 4-2-4 with Messi playing very close to Zlatan Ibrahimovic. When we analyze the game, the key factor here is how Jose Mourinho was going to set up his side to try and stop Barcelona from creating chances, and how Guardiola was going to find an attacking ploy to bypass Inter's defensive shape. When we look at Inter, we have Milito here who's looking to step towards the center backs, but what often happened was that we had Xavi Hernandez dropping in between the center backs to create space for the fullbacks to push forward. How Inter looked to cope with that threat was that they had Wesley Sneijder stick on Xavi throughout that entirety of the game. So they had Sneijder on Xavi. Let's say we had Milito stepping into the path of Piqué, and we did see Sneijder push into the path of Puyol. He would push into Puyol, but he'd block off the passing lane into Xavi to ensure that he couldn't get on the ball. In previous games prior to this Champions League game, we ended up seeing Xavi dominate Arsenal and Real Madrid, and Mourinho was wary of that, so we had Sneijder sit on Xavi to ensure that he couldn't dictate the tempo from deeper positions. Out in the wider areas, you have Pandev and Samuel Eto'o. Pandev's role was to stop Dani Alves from pushing forward, and Samuel Eto'o was supposed to be tasked with sticking towards Maxwell. However, there were times where we had Eto'o tucking into a central position to close down Keita, and that essentially did help Inter mark across the central of the pitch. What we ended up seeing there was that now you had Cambiasso sticking towards Messi, you had Motta stepping into the path of Busquets, and that was how Inter did look to disrupt Barcelona's midfield fluidity. So that's how they look to close down out in the wider areas, and with Sneijder stepping towards Xavi, that leaves Busquets free, and we saw Thiago Motta stepping into that zone, and we ended up having Lionel Messi against Cambiasso if there were 1v1 battles there. When you look at the rest of the pitch, you have Ibrahimovic ahead of Samuel and Lucio, and they did a very good job of stifling Ibrahimovic from dominating that game in and around the box. And then out on the left-hand side, it was Zanetti against Pedro. Knowing this Barcelona side, they have the tendency to drift into different positions to try and get on the ball, and Inter Milan coped with that very well. For instance, we had Keita playing from in to out on that left side, so he was looking to push forward, but he was tasked with sticking towards Maicon. If we didn't have Pedro shifting out to the touchline on that right-hand side, he would drop off deeper to try and drag out Zanetti, and if he wasn't dragging out Zanetti, what would happen here was that Pandev would pick him up, or Thiago Motta would pick him up, and Zanetti would be tasked with dealing with Dani Alves looking to push forward. The key issue that Barcelona had, besides the fact that Guardiola probably should have went with Zlatan Ibrahimovic, was the fact that his two key attacking players were outnumbered in 1v2 battles. Ibrahimovic was up against Samuel and Lucio and he struggled throughout, and Messi often had to drop off into deeper positions based off the fact that Ibrahimovic was occupying his zone. So Messi dropped off into deeper positions in that central area, and what often ended up happening was that when he received the ball, he was closed down by Cambiasso and Motta, or Cambiasso and Eto'o dropping off a bit deeper. And even when he did have those 1v1 battles with Cambiasso, what ended up happening there was that if he was getting the better of Cambiasso, Thiago Motta did a very good job of dropping off deeper to recover and ensure that Messi couldn't get forward. So Messi struggled to get involved in the game, and that was a big issue for Barcelona, which is why if you have, for instance, Messi playing in a central role with Pedro or a Boyan, you're able to run at an aging Inter backline rather than having them play to their strengths. As you could see in the earlier stages of that competition, they shut down Drogba over two legs, and they did a very good job against Zlatan Ibrahimovic here. So Barcelona's only real significant threat could come out from the wider areas, and that was through Dani Alves getting beyond Pandev and Maxwell getting him beyond Eto'o, and that's where they were able to create their chances. In the opening minute, we had had Keita ahead of Maicon and Cambiasso down that left channel. And what we saw was Maxwell running off Samuel Eto'o to receive the ball from Keita. And before Maicon could come across, Maxwell delivered a great ball in towards that 6-yard box, bypassing Lucio. But Samuel applied enough pressure to ensure that Ibrahimovic couldn't direct that ball on goal. And even when you look to the buildup of Barcelona's opener, you have Messi ahead of Motta and Eto'o, and he squares the ball out to Xavi, shifting out to the left channel ahead of Cambiasso. What ends up happening here is that you have Maicon in a narrow position ahead of Keita, and Xavi slides the ball across Cambiasso for Maxwell, once again running off Samuel Eto'o to break into that left channel. And with Lucio looking to shift across, Maxwell just breaks towards the byline, and he ends up pulling the ball back across Lucio, Maicon, and Samuel, darting across the box with Ibrahimovic, and it falls into the path of Pedro, getting goal side of Zanetti, and he fires his effort into the net. And when we look to one final example, we have Dani Alves ahead of Pandev, and he ends up squaring the ball into Pedro ahead of Zanetti. Pedro drops the ball off to Messi ahead of Thiago Motta, and what we see from Pedro is that he shifts laterally across to the free Cambiasso. Messi's ahead of Motta, and Sneijder does look to drop off to ensure that it is 1v2, but when Sneijder drops off, Xavi's able to run off him, and Messi splits those two intermarkers to find Xavi, and what he's able to do now is that he ends up splitting Zanetti and Pandev for Dani Alves breaking into that right half space. But when Dani Alves receives the ball in right half space, he guides his cross beyond Samuel and Ibrahimovic, and Lucio is able to clear it. But as you could see, Inter did a very good job of stifling the middle of the pitch so that Barcelona couldn't penetrate in those areas, and it ultimately did take Ibrahimovic and Messi out of the game. But out in the wider areas, the fullbacks were getting into good positions because Pandev and Eto'o were slightly switching off, and that was an issue that Mourinho had to deal with. So when we look to Inter from an attacking perspective, what we identify is that Mourinho had clear routes to goal. The first route was the fact that he knew that Dani Alves would be looking to push forward, so that created space in transition for Pandev, Sneijder, and Milito to push forward into. Throughout that first half, we saw times where Thiago Motta was clipping balls into that left channel for Milito to pull out PK, and we did see an example of Lucio playing a ball into the right channel where Milito ran across both center backs and dragged out PK into that zone. So that was a clear route to goal for Inter. The issue that they had was they had runners getting into offside positions, and Thiago Motta's passing wasn't very good from long range. The other avenue that they could exploit was the fact that Seydou Keita could be caught in central midfield positions, and that would create space for Maicon to push into, and that developed into a key theme that led to Inter's goals. There was actually one example in that first half that illustrated both themes. We see Keita picking up the ball in midfield, and he ends up skipping by Cambiasso, but when he gets ahead of Samuel, he ends up losing the ball. Samuel ends up dropping the ball off to Cambiasso, and with Keita out of position, that now creates an avenue for Maicon to push forward. He slides the ball out to Maicon, but rather than Maicon looking to push down that right channel, he locates Milito darting across the center backs who are holding a high line, and when he plays that ball over the top for Milito, it's slightly overhit, and Valdez is able to pick it up. But as you can see in that example, you have Maicon pushing forward into space because Keita's caught out of position, and you see Milito breaking across the center backs to get in behind once Inter Milan win possession. And when we look to the build-up to Inter's equalizer, it highlights the threat of Milito and the significance of Pandev. We see Cambiasso sliding a diagonal ball out into the path of Eto'o ahead of Keita recovering his position, and Maxwell shifting over from a narrow position, and you have Eto'o in a 1v2 situation here. He drops the ball off to Maicon and instantly shifts out into that wider zone, and he gets the ball back from the Inter right back, and he ends up pulling the ball across the center backs into the path of Milito ahead of PK. Milito's able to hold up PK, and you have Pandev driving into a narrow position in the box to pull out Dani Alves, and that creates space for Wesley Sneijder to break into in left half space because neither Xavi or Busquets is picking him up. So what Milito ends up doing there is he squares the ball out to Sneijder, who curls his effort past Valdez. But in that build-up, you see the significance of Milito once again. Not only was he able to dart into those channels, he was able to win aerial duels unlike Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and he was able to link play and occupy both center backs. And with Pandev making that run across Dani Alves, it created space for Sneijder to break into, so it created a dual role for Pandev. Yes, you are supposed to be tracking the run of Dani Dani Alves. But as you saw in the previous Champions League season where Milito was getting beyond Dani Alves to provide a threat, Pandev was doing the same thing here, and it led to Inter's equalizer. But as you can see in that first half, Inter did a very good job of stifling the center of the pitch for Barcelona. They neutralized Ibrahimovic and Messi, and their only real flaw was out in the wider areas, and that was an issue that Mourinho needed to fix. Whereas going forward, they had their key route to goal, but they needed to keep runners on side, and they needed to get more out of Maicon attacking that space that Keita left vacant. And when we look to the second half, Mourinho did just that, and Maicon played a prominent role in Inter Milan taking the game to Barcelona. It starts with Messi picking up the ball in a deeper position, and he ends up running beyond Thiago Motta, but Motta does a good job of tracking that run and staying with it, and he ends up poking the ball away from Messi. Zanetti ends up guiding the loose ball into the path of Pandev, who's able to skip past Xavi and Dani Alves with his running, and he ends up locating a gap in between Maxwell and Puyol. You have Milito darting into that gap, and you have Eto'o running across Puyol to bypass Barcelona's high line. Milito receives that ball in right half space, and you have Puyol tracking him. But what we end up seeing there is that before that pass was played, Maicon already started his run in beyond Keita, who was caught in that midfield zone. So Maicon continues that run with Keita tracking him, and Milito ends up pulling the ball back into the path of Maicon. PK can't shift over because he had to take the run of Eto'o, and when Maicon receives that ball, he controls it on his first touch, and he ends up poking it beyond Valdez. But as you could see in the build-up to that goal, all the key elements of what Inter were doing well. Thiago Motta causing a nuisance for Messi. We had Pandev with his running, breaking lines. We saw Milito darting into that channel in behind. And we ended up seeing Maicon running beyond Keita to score the goal. And when we look to Barcelona quickly, we did see a slight shift in Messi's movement as he looked to drop off into that right channel to run out markers. That did lead to the build-up to Inter's second goal, but shortly after that, you saw the reasoning behind it. We ended up seeing Busquets slide the ball out to Messi in that right channel, and he ended up receiving it ahead of Pandev and Zanetti with Dani Alves overlapping. That is the battle that he wants, because Messi 1v1 against Zanetti, you would take Messi, and you do have Pandev, who isn't a natural defender, looking to try and stop the best player on the planet. So what Messi ends up doing there is that he cuts across both, and before Cambiasso could step in, he fired a low shot on goal that Julio Cesar did push away. But as Mourinho noticed that Messi was constantly drifting into that zone in the second half, he brought on Stankovic for Pandev to offer more protection to that side of the pitch. And shortly after that, Inter were able to kill off the game. It stemmed from Thiago Motta's sliding challenge on Xavi in Barcelona's third, and he slid the ball into Maicon, breaking beyond Keita, who looked to push forward in transition. Maicon receives the ball in that right channel, and before Maxwell can shift across, you have Milito darting in between PK and Maxwell, and you have Sneijder breaking in towards the far post beyond an advanced Dani Alves. We see Maicon wrap that ball across Maxwell and PK for Sneijder, and he ends up nodding the ball across PK in towards that 6-yard box for Milito to nod in from point blank range. And in the final half hour of that game, we ended up seeing Abidal come on for Ibrahimovic with Maxwell pushing forward, and then the game followed the template as expected, with Barcelona pegging back Inter Milan, playing the ball around the edge of the box, and Inter looking to break in transition. But when you break down the game as a whole, Mourinho deserves credit here for stifling the center of the pitch to ensure that Barcelona couldn't play through those zones, and the fact that he identified a legitimate route to goal through Pandev's running through midfield, Milito's ability to run the channels and occupy the center backs, and Maicon bypassing Keita. However, Guardiola did help him based off the fact that he got his tactics wrong. He started Ibrahimovic, and that ensured that Messi couldn't dominate the game in and around the final third. And when you look at Barcelona's attacking options, if the midfield is stifled out of the game, the only real threat that they have running in behind is Pedro. The problem here was that they were constantly trying to play through Ibrahimovic, and that did disrupt their overall ability to dictate the tempo of the game and the fluidity in their passing. And Messi was uninvolved throughout, and it wasn't due to the fact that Mourinho had a legitimate route to stopping Messi, but based off the fact that Ibrahimovic's positioning derailed Messi's ability to impact the game. And if you don't have any other attacking outlets, the least you could do is have the best player in the world win the game for you, and he couldn't do that here based off Pep Guardiola's setup, and that was a key factor to how Inter Milan positioned themselves for that infamous game at the Camp Nou. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.